Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive.
It's good to be back.
Today, we're diving into the world of Sherlock Holmes.
Oh.
Specifically, how to think like him.
Yeah.
We're going to be using Mastermind, How to Think Like Sherlock Holmes, by Maria Konnikova as our guide.
Excellent book.
Have you read it?
Oh, yeah, cover to cover.
It's so good.
Really fascinating.
Our mission today is to learn how to apply that Holmesian thinking to our everyday lives.
Absolutely.
So think sharper observations,
Yeah.
better decision-making.
Yeah. Boost your creativity.
Like a true detective.
Exactly. And you know what's so cool about this is that you can use these skills anywhere.
Oh, for sure.
Not just for solving crimes.
Right.
You know, they can really help you in everyday life.
Absolutely.
Make better decisions, solve problems,
Yeah.
be more creative.
Okay, so let's get started.
Let's do it.
What always gets me about Sherlock Holmes
Yeah.
is that power of observation.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like when he just sees Watson for the first time,
Right.
he's like, oh, you're in Afghanistan?
Unbelievable.
How does he do that?
It's amazing, right?
Yeah.
So it's this thing called attentive inattention.
Attentive inattention.
Yeah, have you ever heard of that?
I don't think so.
So basically, our brains are always filtering out information
Okay.
that it thinks is unimportant.
So we're not really paying attention to everything.
Right, exactly. And there's this really cool experiment
Okay.
that shows this perfectly.
I'm intrigued.
It's called the invisible gorilla experiment.
Okay.
So you watch this video, and you have to count how many times people pass a basketball.
Okay. I can do that.
Right, it seems simple enough.
Yeah.
But get this, while you're focused on counting the passes,
Uh-huh.
a person in a gorilla suit walks right through the middle of the screen.
Wait, what? Yeah.
Yeah, and most people completely miss it.
I would miss that.
It's unbelievable,
I'm
right?
going to have to look that one up.
You should. It's wild.
Okay, so we're missing a lot more than we think.
Absolutely, we are.
But Holmes, he seems to see everything.
Right. He's a master at choosing what to focus on.
It's like he knows what's important before it even happens.
Exactly. It's like if Watson was trying to spot a plane in the sky,
Okay.
he'd be running around looking everywhere.
Frantically.
Yes, getting tired out really quickly.
Makes sense.
But Holmes, he would strategically position himself, conserve his energy while maximizing his chances of actually seeing the plane.
So it's not just about looking, it's about looking smart.
Exactly.
Okay, that's fascinating.
So we need to be more mindful
Okay.
and really selective.
About what we observe.
Yes, exactly.
But I feel like there's got to be more to it than that.
Oh, absolutely. There's more to it than just seeing.
Right.
Holmes teaches us to be active observers.
Active.
Yes,
huh?
so we're not just passively taking in information.
So we're engaging with it.
Yes, and we're building what Konnikova calls our brain attic.
Brain attic.
I love that term.
Me too.
It's this mental database full of carefully chosen details.
Okay, but how do we decide what goes in this brain attic?
That's the key question, right?
Right, because there is just so much information out there.
It can be overwhelming.
It really can.
We have to understand how context shapes our perception.
Context, okay.
Yeah, like think about how you feel when you walk into like a really fancy store.
Oh, yeah.
Do you ever find yourself spending more?
Maybe?
That's the context influencing your perception.
Interesting.
It's like the white coat effect.
A code effect.
Ever heard of that one?
That sounds familiar.
So just being in a doctor's office,
Okay.
seeing that physician in a white coat
Uh-huh.
can actually change your vital signs.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that crazy?
I never thought about it that way.
It's powerful.
So it's not just what we see, but how we see it.
Exactly.
And how our surroundings and expectations might be changing things.
Right. We have to strive for objectivity.
Okay.
Be mindful of that context.
Be aware.
Yes.
But even if we're really good at observing, we can still mess up when we're trying to make deductions.
That's true.
I know I do that all the time.
Yeah.
I jump to conclusions way too quickly.
Me too. It's so easy to do.
It is. So what's the key to making better deductions?
Well, we have to recognize that sometimes our intuition
Yeah.
can lead us astray.
Oh, I,
There's a great example of this in The Adventure of the Three Students.
okay. I think I remember that one.
It involves this wine glass with bee swing in it.
Bee swing.
Yeah, it's that sediment you see at the bottom of the glass.
Okay.
Watson's intuition told him that the glass with the most bee swing
Uh-huh.
must have been poured last.
That makes sense.
Right, but Holmes explains why that's not actually logical.
Oh, that's right.
It had to do with a student trying to cheat on an exam.
Yeah, now I remember.
And this leads to these common deductive errors.
Like what?
Like the conjunction fallacy.
Conjunction fallacy. What's that?
So we tend to think that specific detailed scenarios
Okay.
are more likely than more general ones.
Even if that's not true.
Exactly, even though logic says the opposite should be true.
So, like, it's more likely someone's a bank teller than a bank teller and a feminist activist.
Exactly.
But our brains want to make it more interesting.
Right. It's like we're drawn to the more elaborate story,
Makes sense.
even if it's not the most logical one.
So how do we avoid these traps?
Good question.
How do we deduce, like Holmes?
Holmes forces us to question our assumptions.
Okay.
We have to consider base rates.
What are those?
It's basically how often something truly occurs.
Okay.
And we have to entertain all the possibilities.
Even the improbable ones.
Especially those, because sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction.
Right.
And we can't forget about omission neglect.
Omission neglect, what's that?
It's when we focus too much on the information we do have,
Okay.
and we fail to consider what might be missing.
So it's like we're solving a puzzle, but ignoring some of the
Yep,
pieces.
exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
So observation deduction.
Yeah.
But what about imagination?
Well, that's a good one.
Where does that fit in?
Yeah, because isn't that more for, like, artists and dreamers?
That's a common misconception.
Okay.
Imagination is crucial for everyone.
Really?
It's the bridge between what we observe and what we deduce.
How so?
Well, both Holmes and the physicist Richard Feynman
Oh, wow.
talked about imagination as a key part of the scientific method. It's about taking what you observe
Uh-huh.
and creatively recombining it in your mind.
So you can explore different scenarios.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have to give ourselves that mental space to play with ideas.
Yes, exactly.
But I think a lot of people are kind of afraid of being creative,
I think you're right.
or they get stuck in those rigid ways of thinking.
There's a classic experiment that demonstrates this.
Oh, tell me about it.
It's called the candle problem.
Okay.
So you're given a candle, a box of tacks, and some matches.
Okay.
And your task is to attach the candle to a wall using only those items.
Sounds tricky.
It is, and a lot of people struggle because of something called functional fixedness.
Functional fixedness.
They get so stuck on the box's usual function.
As a container.
Right. They can't see beyond that.
But I bet Holmes could solve that in a second.
Oh, absolutely.
He'd be like, oh, just use the box as a platform.
Exactly. He wouldn't limit himself.
He'd be rearranging those objects in his mind, seeing all those possibilities.
That's where psychological distance comes in.
Psychological distance.
Yeah, Holmes uses his three-pipe problem.
Three-pipe problem.
He'd sit down with his pipe, smoke, and detach himself from the case.
To give his mind some space.
Exactly, and it allowed his imagination to work its magic.
So are you saying we all need to start smoking pipes?
No.
Wait, I'm just kidding. But seriously, how do we create that kind of mental distance?
There are lots of ways.
Like what?
Meditation, visualization, even just engaging in activities that break us out of our routines.
To get us out of our usual headspace.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
It's about giving our brains that freedom.
To make those connections?
Yes, those aha moments.
Okay, so we've talked about observation.
Yes.
Imagination.
Right.
Now I really want to dive into deduction. How does Holmes take all of those observations, his imaginative leaps, and arrive at those brilliant deductions?
Well, that's what we'll explore next.
I can't wait.
It's not just about logic.
Okay.
It's about understanding biases, probabilities,
Yeah.
and the dangers of incomplete information.
I'm ready.
Let's dive in. It's fascinating, isn't it?
It really is.
This whole process of deduction.
Yeah, it's not as easy as it looks.
Not at all.
You know, in the books and the movies.
Right.
It seems like Holmes just effortlessly solves these cases.
It all seems so clear.
Yeah.
But there's so much more to it.
Right. So what are some of the things that can trip us up?
Okay. Well, one of the biggest ones
Yeah.
is something called narrative self-deception.
Narrative self-deception.
Have you ever heard that?
I don't think so.
So basically, as humans,
Uh-huh.
we have this natural tendency to create stories
Okay.
that make sense to us,
Uh-huh.
even if they're not actually true.
Oh, I do that all the time.
Yeah, we all do.
It's like I'll have this idea in my head,
Right.
and then I'll only focus on the information that supports that idea.
Exactly.
And I'll ignore all the other stuff.
You're cherry picking the evidence.
Exactly. And then I'm like, oh, yeah, I was right all along.
It's like we want to be right.
Yes.
Even if it means distorting reality.
So how do we stop doing that?
Well, Holmes emphasizes this idea of being aware of our own biases.
Our biases.
Yeah, you know, like that tendency to favor information
Uh-huh.
that confirms what we already believe.
Oh, right. Confirmation bias.
Exactly.
We got to be careful about that.
We do, and we have to actively look for information that might challenge our beliefs.
Even if it makes us uncomfortable.
Especially if it makes us uncomfortable.
So it's about being open to new information.
Yes, and being willing to admit when we're wrong.
Oh, that's hard.
It is, but it's essential.
So it's not just about being smart.
Right.
It's about being intellectually honest.
Exactly. And you know what this reminds me of?
What's that?
Carol Dweck's work.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of her.
She talks about growth mindset.
Growth mindset.
Yeah, so it's this belief that intelligence isn't fixed.
So we can get smarter.
Yes, exactly. We can develop our abilities.
Through effort and learning.
Right, and Holmes is like the embodiment of this.
He's always learning.
Always pushing himself.
So how does this growth mindset actually help us think like Holmes?
Well, have you ever heard of stereotype threat?
Stereotype threat. Sounds familiar.
So it's this idea that when people are aware of negative stereotypes about their group, it can actually hurt their performance. Really? Even if they don't believe those stereotypes.
That's kind of scary.
It is. It shows the power of our beliefs.
Wow. So just thinking you're not capable can actually make you perform worse.
It can.
That's incredible.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, we need to believe in ourselves.
Exactly. And we need to believe that we can grow.
That we can learn and improve, just like Holmes.
Exactly.
Speaking of learning,
Holmes
was like a walking encyclopedia.
He had this incredible range of knowledge.
It seemed like he knew something about everything.
Right. Even the most obscure topics.
Like jellyfish.
Yes, he knew about jellyfish.
I'm not sure how that would ever be helpful.
You never know. It could come in handy.
I guess you're right.
He understood that knowledge. Yeah. Even seemingly useless knowledge could be surprisingly valuable.
It's like that saying.
What's that?
Knowledge is power.
Absolutely. And it's not just about the specific facts. It's about the connections you can make.
Between different ideas.
Exactly.
So the more you know, the more you can see those connections.
Right. And the better you can understand the world.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's like expanding your mental toolkit.
So we should be lifelong learners.
Always be curious, always be learning.
But wasn't Holmes also kind of overconfident sometimes?
Well, he was certainly confident in his abilities.
But didn't he ever make mistakes?
Even the greatest minds can fall prey to biases and errors.
Right, everyone's human.
Exactly, and there's a fascinating example of this.
Oh, tell me about it.
It's the story of the Cottingley fairies.
Cottingley fairies, what's that?
So back in the early 1900s, these two young girls took some photographs that appeared to show fairies.
Fairies like little winged creatures.
Yes, exactly. And get this. Even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
The creator of Sherlock Holmes.
Yes, even he was convinced.
He believed in fairy.
He was so focused on verifying the authenticity of the photos that he didn't consider the possibility
that the fairies themselves could be fake.
Exactly.
Wow, so even Conan Doyle, the master of deduction, could be fooled.
Just goes to show that we all have blind spots.
And that we need to be careful about overconfidence.
Absolutely.
So how do we avoid falling into those traps?
Well, one thing we can do is use external aids.
External aids?
Yeah, like checklists.
Checklists like to-do lists.
Yeah, exactly. But more specific. There's a famous example of this.
What's that?
The Michigan ICU checklist. They implemented this checklist in intensive care units, and it dramatically reduced infections.
Really?
It's incredible. It shows that even experienced doctors can benefit from having a simple list.
To remind them of the essentials.
Exactly.
So it's like acknowledging that we're not perfect.
Right.
And using tools to help us avoid mistakes.
Exactly.
What about technology?
Oh, yeah. Technology can be a huge help.
How so?
Well, we can use it to store information. Take notes, create reminders, essentially extend our mental capacity.
It's like having a super brain.
Right, and it can help us offload some of that cognitive burden.
So we can focus on the bigger picture.
Exactly.
But we have to be careful.
Oh, absolutely.
We don't want to become too reliant on technology.
Right, the goal is to enhance our thinking.
Not replace it.
Exactly, we need to find that balance.
Okay, so we've talked about observation, imagination, deduction, mindset, the importance of being open to new information.
Yes.
And even using tools like checklists and technology.
But there's one more element of Holmesian thinking.
Okay, what's that?
That we haven't touched on yet.
I'm intrigued.
It's called environmental appropriateness.
Environmental appropriateness.
Have you ever heard of that?
I don't think so.
So basically, it's about adapting your approach to different situations and people.
I see.
Holmes was a master of this.
He could be charming. aloof,
right,
logical.
Exactly.
He knew how to get what he needed.
From anyone.
Like he was so friendly to that pawnbroker.
Yes. In the Sign of Form.
Then he was totally different.
Right.
With those informants.
In The Adventure of the Bruce Partington Plans.
It's like he was a different person.
He knew how to tailor his approach.
To fit the situation.
Exactly.
That's a valuable skill.
It is.
Not just for detectives.
Right.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
What does all this mean for our listener?
How can they start applying these principles?
In their own lives.
Well, it all starts with recognizing that our minds are not fixed.
Okay.
They're not these static things, you know? They're dynamic.
Okay.
We can hone them.
Right.
Refine them.
Through practice.
Exactly, through conscious effort.
That makes me feel better.
Oh, yeah.
Because it makes it seem more attainable.
Yeah, for sure. Because you don't have to be a born genius to think like Holmes.
Right.
You can develop these skills over time.
So Konnikova says,
yeah,
our brains are adaptable.
They are incredibly adaptable.
We can rewire our neural pathways.
It's true, you know?
Wow.
Through practice and mindfulness.
It's like building mental muscle.
It really is.
So where do we start?
How do we actually do this?
Yeah. How do we think more like Sherlock Holmes?
Okay, well, Konnikova has this great suggestion.
Okay, I'm ready.
She calls it a decision diary.
A decision diary.
You ever kept one of those?
I haven't, but it sounds interesting.
So basically, every time you make a big decision, you write it down.
Okay.
Like, what were your observations? What was your reasoning?
Okay.
Did you have any doubts?
Yeah.
And then what was the outcome?
Because it's like documenting the whole process.
Exactly. And it helps you to see those patterns.
In your thinking.
Yes. You can start to recognize those biases.
Okay.
And you can refine your decision-making strategies over time.
So it's like we're learning from our mistakes.
Exactly. It's a form of self-reflection.
That I think Holmes would appreciate.
I think you would.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
From mindful observation to the power of imagination.
That's a big one.
It is.
And of course, the art of deduction. It's been a journey.
It has. But it's shown us how to approach the world. With that more critical eye.
Yeah.
That more curious
or insightful eye.
More like Sherlock Holmes.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean for you, listener?
Yeah, think about it.
How can you apply these principles to your life?
You know, the world really does become a much richer place when you start to think like Sherlock Holmes.
We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Into the mind of the world's greatest detective.
It's been fun.
Remember, the journey of becoming a mastermind is ongoing.
It is.
So keep observing, keep imagining, keep deducing.
And never stop learning.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.